Yes, what's good, ladies and gents? Welcome back to the MKO Pugilism Boxing channel, where we talk all things boxing. Do remember to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. So let's talk about it. So we had some good boxing over here in the UK, which was headlined at Crystal Palace's ground, Selhurst Park. I think they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Crystal Palace FC football club, and we had the headliner, which was defending champion Chris Billam Smith at cruiserweight versus Richard Riakporhe. Richard Riakporhe is a local boy, South London boy. He's from big Crystal Palace fan and everything, so he had that in his favor going into this. It was a massive occasion, and this was a rematch because around 5 years ago, 2019, these two guys fought. It was a close fight, but Richard Riakporhe, he scored a knockdown in that fight, and it was close, but Riakporhe was sort of the deserving winner of that fight. So going into this one, I thought it would be close, but I kind of edged it towards Richard Riakporhe. I thought, going on recent form, for me, he kind of looked better than Chris Billam Smith. I thought Chris Billam Smith was taking too much punishment lately. I saw the fight against Masternak, and it worried me on his behalf that, okay, he was losing against this guy. That didn't look very good, and he had to pull it out the bag with a knockout. So for me, I thought momentum-wise and going on past performances that you got to favour Richard Riakporhe, but boy, was I wrong, because this was like the complete, you could say kind of the opposite of what I expected, at least in terms of who was going to win, because it turned out to be a complete and utter domination by Chris Billam Smith. I mean, from beginning to end, he pretty much dominated Richard Riakporhe. I mean, even from the opening bell, and certain things that I was thinking about going into it, like sort of lack of head movement and sometimes lack of lateral movement. The fact that, in past fights, Billam Smith was getting hit a bit too much. They seem to have gone right back to the drawing board and really worked on those things. And, in many ways in his fight, Chris Billam Smith kind of made Riakporhe look a bit pedestrian, because, he was able to sort of outmaneuver Richard Riakporhe in this fight. His head movement was quite decent. The upper body and lateral movement was brilliant, and you could tell that Riakporhe's got a good jab, and he early on trying to use the jab. But Chris Billam Smith, smartly, he sort of jabbed with the jabber, began to sort of out jab Richard Riakporhe and just win that battle. And then, as we know, of the two guys, I would say Riakporhe's kind of the bigger puncher. He's a guy sort of known to, iron guys out and stuff like that. He's the guy of the two where you'd think, oh, if there's going to be a knockout, it'd probably be him going into it. But no, Chris Billam Smith sort of turned that completely on its head. He didn't lose many rounds at all, maybe 3 rounds the most or something like that, because he was just completely and utterly dominant. Because it's like whatever Richard Riakporhe wanted to do, when he tried to sort of set himself to punch, Chris Billam Smith would always move, he would always shift, he would always feint, he just kept giving Riakporhe things to think about. And Riakporhe wasn't really, he let his right hand go a few times, but he wasn't really able to let it go very much, because like every time he set himself up to try and throw power shots against Billam Smith, Chris Billam Smith would just make a maneuver, would just make a move, or just throw a punch and land a counter, and then it's like Riakporhe would just keep having to reset. And it's like Richard Riakporhe just simply couldn't get to grips with what Chris Billam Smith was doing. It was like, Billam Smith was just perfectly sort of fluid. He looked quicker in there with his punches, and his mind was better. The mindset was better. With his thinking was quicker, and his execution of punches was just so much better. And he was just all around, he just outboxed, outfought, and really just completely outclassed Richard Riakporhe in this fight. It was overall it was a domination by Chris Billam Smith, which is not really what I expected. I expected it to be quite a close fight. It went to ebb and flow and go back and forth. But this was one of those where Riakporhe had moments, but they were so few and far between that it almost was irrelevant. It didn't really matter. So, yeah, very impressive overall by Chris Billam Smith. At the end of that fight, there was no doubt who was a winner. Billam Smith, great movement, as I said, the lateral movement, the head movement, counter punching. Chris Billam Smith was just all around that much better than Riakporhe. Riakporhe sort of looked pedestrian in there. He couldn't really get going on anything in there. Couldn't really mount his attacks because it's like what he was doing was just too slow, and virtually everything that Riakporhe tried to do, all these times he tried to set his feet and set up his attacks. Is like whatever he tried to do, what do you call it? Chris Billam Smith had an answer for, and even when he did try to load up and throw his power shots, it's like Billam Smith saw it coming a mile away. So evidently we saw that of the two, although Billam Smith lost the first fight, they'd evidently done their homework. Him and Shane McGuigan, they you could see clear they'd done their homework, and clear, very very clear victory for Chris Billam Smith. Brilliant stuff for him. Next, they're talking about unifications, and they're mentioning these other cruiserweights. And I think they want to avoid sort of Riakporhe for now. They mentioned Gilberto Ramirez as that was one of their sort of big names that they mentioned that they wouldn't mind fighting next. But when Riakporhe's name came up, that was sort of the last thing that they want to get the other belts from Ramirez and the other cruiserweight champion, and then at the end they get to Riakporhe. So that seems to be what they're on there. I think Billam Smith was talking about fighting in America. That's a dream for him. He'd like to do that. And to be fair to him, yeah, why not, man? Why not? I think, you deserve it. You're a world champion. You defended it against good guys. And yeah, brilliant performance by Chris Billam Smith. It's a complete domination, to be honest with you. A one-sided fight. And I for one was very impressed with it. So let me know what you thought about this. Chris Billam Smith, dominates Richard Riakporhe in front of his home fans, Selhurst Park, Crystal Palace, and impressively gets his revenge there. Brilliant performance in my book. Let me know what you think. And until next time, it's MKO Pugilism, over and out.